RPGs. Role-playing games. I'm talking about traditional, turn-based JRPG kind of games, not like Smash where you can choose what color Game & Watch you want to play as. I have a love-hate relationship with these kind of games. I love the stories, I love the characters, but what is this gameplay? I'd much rather be playing a game where you play Puyo Puyo or something in between the story sections, than this repetitive, bland, and antiquated combat system that should have stayed on the NES. That being said, there are still some RPGs that stand out as some of my favorite games ever. The Pokemon series, because dinosaurs. Fossil Fighters, because dinosaurs. And the Mother series, because all of this. I absolutely adore the Mother series. When I first played Earthbound, also known as Mother 2 on the SNES Classic Edition, I instantly fell in love. And after playing through the rest of the series, I can safely say that Mother 3 is my favorite RPG, and among my absolute favorite games, period. And while I would absolutely love to talk about these two games, it seems wrong to tackle them without first talking about where the series began. The game simply titled Mother. If I had to call one thing the single strongest part of the original Mother, it would be its... Tell me, how is Final Fantasy I different from Final Fantasy II different from Final Fantasy the rest of them? And how are all of those different from any Dragon Quest game? They're all just Fire Emblem with worse gameplay and fewer characters in Smash. Now let's take a look at the opening of Mother. You start in a room with no direction. With nowhere else to go, you head for the only door and boom, you're in a fistfight with your lamp. This game is unique to say the least. Instead of exploring a fantasy world, you're exploring modern cities and suburbs. Instead of magic, your party has psychic powers. Instead of fighting ogres to a glorious orchestrated soundtrack, you're fighting hippies while the Signature Selects version of Johnny B. Good plays in the background. Instead of meeting friends along the way, you meet Lloyd. The characters in this game are just something else. All of the kids in Twinkle Elementary School are just the worst human beings you'll ever meet. There's this lady who offers to give you a hint for a significant amount of money, and when you decline, she just disappears and doesn't come back. You'd find Lloyd's dad in a garbage can, obviously ashamed of what he's created. You never know what a character will say or do. Speaking of, a lot of the dialogue is genuinely funny. I would bring up some of my favorite examples, but they're really the most funny in context. 19 out of 20 NPCs are completely serious, but every once in a while, there'll be one who just says something completely unexpected, and it's pretty funny. Comedy's subjective, of course, but you'll have to play the game to see what I mean. And I won't talk about this for very long at all, because you'll hear it for the rest of the video, but the music is phenomenal. Some of the best songs of the series started in this game, and the music is a joy to listen to despite being on the NES. Well, that's great, but setting and charm don't really make a game. So let's talk about the... Yep, this definitely is an NES RPG. The easiest aspect to talk about is the combat, because it's basically exactly what you'd expect. Fight is a physical attack, dependent on your equipped weapon. PSI is a psychic ability, dependent on your amount of PP. Goods is using an item. Check is a waste of a turn. Guard is exactly what it sounds like, and it's only useful during the final boss. Run is just a less effective dimension warp. And setup changes text speed, so I don't know why they called it setup instead of just text or something. The developers knew that turn-based combat is the worst thing in the world, because there's also an option called Auto that literally plays out the fight for you, but I didn't use it because I was unwilling to accept that these fights were a waste of my time. Fights in this game are dependent upon several stats that are never explained anywhere in-game, and that's kind of a problem because these are weird. So here are what each of the stats do according to Starman.net. Offense increases the damage of physical attacks, but not psychic ones. Defense increases resistance to physical attacks, but again, not psychic ones. Fight increases your chance of getting a critical hit, and your chance of hitting at all, and it also increases your chance of dodging, and decreases the chance of being hit by a critical hit. Speed determines turn order. Wisdom increases the chance of successfully hitting an enemy with a status ailment. Strength is a number roughly indicating how much your HP will increase at the next level. And it decreases the chance of getting hit by darkness, poison, and paralysis. Force is a number roughly indicating how much your PP will increase at the next level, and it decreases the chance of getting hit by puzzled, confused, and hypnosis. Did you get all that? Me neither. I sure wish the game told me any of this. Now, while you probably didn't pay much attention to what I said, let me point out some flaws in the system. Contrary to what I believed for my entire playthrough, speed does not affect your chances of running from a fight, which will always be 50-50. Additionally, no stat affects the damage or resistance to psychic attacks. Some equipment and PSI abilities can affect these, but in general, PSI proficiency does not scale with character level at all. You simply learn more powerful and more costly abilities. And perhaps most frustratingly, fight, strength, and force all sound like they do the same thing. I can kind of understand strength because it's kind of like constitution, I guess, but force just makes no sense. Another place the game could have done a little more explaining is with the PSI abilities. There are a few big things that really annoyed me with the PSI system. You see, some abilities have multiple versions. The general order of moves is Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Pi, and Omega, though the offensive moves skip Pi for some reason, but that's beside the point. The general rule is that the further in the alphabet, the more effective the move. For example, PK Freeze Alpha does 8 to 15 damage, and PK Freeze Beta does 36 to 45 damage. So let's first look at the two main support abilities, Life Up and Healing. PK Life Up Alpha through Gamma restore progressively more HP to an ally, and PK Life Up Pi and Omega restore HP to the entire party. Alright, that kinda makes sense, I can get down to it. Each progressive version of Life Up takes the last version and adds something to it. Now, let's look at Healing. Healing Alpha cures an ally of poison. So, following the trend established by Life Up, Healing Beta should take the ability of Healing Alpha and build on it. So what does Healing Beta do? It cures paralysis, and only paralysis. It's the same thing for the rest of the healing abilities. Each one cures exactly one specific status ailment, so unless you look up what they do, you'll have to use trial and error and waste a bunch of PP to find the right ability to cure you, which might not even exist, by the way. Unless you're poisoned, paralyzed, turned to stone, asleep, or dead, there is no ability that can heal you, and you have to trek all the way back to town to see the doctor. The offensive abilities aren't much better. PK Freeze Alpha and Beta do some damage to one enemy. Cool. Freeze Gamma puts an enemy in a critical state, meaning one more damage will defeat them. Alright, that's also cool. So what does Freeze Omega do? It does some damage to all enemies. It doesn't follow the trend at all, and it's nearly exactly the same as PK Fire Beta. Speaking of PK Fire, Fire Alpha through Gamma does some damage to all enemies, and Fire Omega instantly defeats every enemy. I don't think Fire Omega can miss either, so it's just a win the fight button. But you know what? That follows a trend. It makes sense. Good job, PK Fire. And then there's PK Beam. Beam Alpha and Beta do some damage to one enemy, basically making them just PK Freeze. Beam Gamma instantly kills one enemy, making it just Freeze Gamma with one less step. And then Beam Omega does some damage to all enemies. This is just Freeze with a different name. And then there's PK Thunder. Thunder Alpha and Beta are basically Freeze Alpha and Beta, and Thunder Gamma is basically Freeze Omega. Does that seem kind of dumb? Are you wondering why there are three different abilities that essentially do the same thing? Me too. Keep in mind, the game doesn't explain any of this. You either have to figure it out through trial and error or look it up. Also, the insta-kill moves work on bosses, completely trivializing the fight for some reason. Well, that's about as much of the combat I can stomach talking about, so let's move on to the overworld gameplay. An interesting thing about the level design in this game is that vertical lines are basically never straight. This means that every wall is slanted, and when you want to follow a path that goes up and down, you have to walk diagonally. It looks cool, it really does, but it's pretty annoying sometimes, like the time I went all the way up Mount Itoy, the most dangerous area in the game, but then I had to go all the way back down to get Lloyd, wasting 20 minutes because I talked to Teddy from the wrong side. Speaking of wasting my time, this game does it a lot. Perhaps it's because it's a game on the NES and it's relatively short, so they wanted to pad out some playtime, but it is really just not fun. The game has these two commands, talk and check, which should really just be one command, but because they aren't, I spent a few minutes trying to figure out how to fight this dragon in Magicant, and eventually I had to look it up because I was checking him instead of talking to him. Another thing that never failed to get on my nerves was how the game dealt with money. Instead of picking it up off of your defeated enemies, your dad gives you money for every enemy you defeat, and he puts it in your bank account. Every time you want money, you have to find an ATM machine, go into the menu, go to Goods, navigate over to your ATM card, select Use, and then go through another set of menus to finally get the money you earned. What this also means is that there's absolutely no way to get money without an ATM machine. The game also discourages you from carrying cash because you lose it when you game over, so it's far safer to leave it in your account. This means that if you leave most of your money in your account and try to head to Snowman but end up not having enough money to fully travel there by train, you have to walk along the tracks, an extremely dangerous trip, because apparently there's no ATM machine in this entire section of the map. Sorry moron, should have carried more cash. Another system that really pushed my buttons was the inventory system. You have the most restrictive inventory in any RPG I've ever seen. Each person can carry 8 items, and some items take up permanent space, like the ATM card. Anytime you want someone to use an item, it has to be in their inventory, but the only way to give someone an item is if they have an open space. So if you want a character to use something from another character's inventory, you have to first drop something from their inventory to clear up a spot, and then give them the item. It's not fun, it's annoying. And my problems with the inventory tie in perfectly with my problems with Yucca Desert. I absolutely hate this place. It's big, it's empty, it's full of absurdly dangerous enemies, and there's this guy. He'll give you rides in his plane, if you pay for them of course, and will even let you ride in his tank if you give him 10 ticket stubs. Cool, right? No. You see, there are 3 different routes you can take in the plane, and because you'll probably have 3 party members at this point, if you take each ride once, you'll have 9 ticket stubs. If the game let you move on with just 9 ticket stubs, it would have been perfect, but no, you have to ride another time on a route you've already seen at this point. Now that wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact that each ticket stub takes up an entire inventory slot, and this guy won't let you ride unless you have enough open slots for each of the 3 ticket stubs. So if you end up dropping 2 of your ticket stubs to make room, you still need at least 10 open inventory slots. Or so I thought, but I've since learned you can drop all of the ticket stubs and this guy will still count them towards the 10. You know, it would have been great if this game gave me any indication of this at all. So you go through all this trouble just to ride in this tank for like a minute and a half before it gets destroyed, and you have to find your way through this labyrinth filled with these stupid lying monkeys, and you're finally out of the worst area in the game. Now, overworld gameplay can't be all bad, right? I mean, is there any form of fast travel? Well, calling it fast travel doesn't really describe all the trouble you have to go through just to get to your destination slightly faster than walking there. You see, towards the beginning of the game, you enter Magicant for the first time. You can find the Onyx hook here, which will automatically teleport you back into Magicant. Convenient, right? Wrong. Every time you want to leave Magicant, you have to find this specific hole and then enter these holes in the right order, and then navigate through this little maze, and then you end up somewhere that's still like 5 minutes from the closest town, and probably far further from your actual destination. How convenient. But there is one other version of fast travel, the PSI ability teleportation. With this you can teleport back to any town you've already visited. Finally, an actually useful form of fast travel, right? Well, first of all, you unlock this like 4/5 of the way through the game, and it's not only possible, but actually fairly easy to miss, because you have to use telepathy on this specific baby who will teach it to you. Additionally, the only way to teleport is to build up speed by running an annoyingly long distance without hitting anything, speeding up the entire time. This means you either have to find a long straight path without anything in the way that could interrupt your teleport, or have insane movement skill. While it's better than the Onyx hook, it's still far from convenient. By now you're probably thinking, Logum, you just wrote 3 pages of the script just tearing into the gameplay of this game, basically saying nothing good about it. Why would I play this? Well, because I'm about to get into some heavy spoilers, I'm going to make a quick conclusion here. If you've played Earthbound or Mother 3 and like them, then maybe play this game with a walkthrough, but for everybody else, I can't recommend it. This is absolutely not the place to start with the series. Alright, if you haven't played the game and you plan on playing it in the future, you may want to click off now, because we're going to talk about the story of this game is oddly non-existent for the majority of the experience. All you know at the beginning is that this couple disappeared at some point, your grandfather studied psychic abilities, and there are some melodies you ought to find. After that, the majority of the game takes place in these self-contained stories. The girl went to the graveyard and never came back, the animals at the zoo have been out of control, the railroad is blocked by some rocks, that kind of thing. You eventually talk to the Queen of Magicant, and she says she can't remember the song she used to sing, so now you know what the melodies are for, but you still don't really know much about what's going on until the last 30 minutes of the game. After you collect all the melodies and play the song for the Queen of Magicant, she tells you that she raised Gygus, the final boss, who had also not been mentioned at all before this, as her own child, hence the title Mother. She then dies, and you're transported to the top of Mount Toy, where you find a bunch of people who have been missing throughout the game, and head toward the final battle. Speaking of the final battle, the fight against Gygus is extremely unconventional. You cannot beat Gygus with physical attacks.
Rather, you have to wait for him to stop spitting exposition and then sing to him a bunch of times until he feels bad about trying to destroy humanity and just heads out. This final battle, in fact, this entire story, is really good in concept, but it's terribly executed. The story doesn't incentivize you to keep playing the game. The only thing that kept me going was the promise that there had to be some sort of story as I reached the end. Honestly, the real reward at the end isn't the conclusion at all, it's the final cutscene. Every single final cutscene in the series is phenomenal, even in the worst game. I didn't care about any of these characters, but I still have a strong emotional reaction to this ending. There's a lot more I could say about this game, there really is, but very little of it is positive. The best way to describe this game is to compare it to the original Legend of Zelda. You should respect these games for what they started and what they managed to achieve on the hardware, but you really should not play these unless you're a fan of the series. I respect Mother a lot, but it's not a game I'm really planning on playing again. Well, that's about all I have to say on Mother. If you enjoyed this video, and if you want to hear my thoughts on the other games in the series, you can always subscribe. I mean, that'd be pretty cool. I also got all this footage by streaming on Twitch, so if you want to check me out there, there'll be a link in the description. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching, and remember, keep gaming, gamers.